Nahum, when we read the book of the prophet Nahum, what we find is a real poet whose poetry rivals any other book in the Hebrew scriptures in the Bible. But his words have been described as a hymn of hate with an absence of distinctively religious motifs, meaning here we have a prophet who again is speaking all sorts of, with a message of doom and gloom, and whose message is not necessarily so religious. Chapter 1, let's turn to the book of Nahum in our Bibles and see if we can tell the acrostic that's contained. An acrostic simply means that we're going to begin each sentence with a different letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And in many of our Bibles, at least in the translation that I have, it doesn't talk about this. But if we were to have a translation, essentially what happens is in the Greek language, the first letters of the Greek language are alpha, beta, and gamma. Alpha, beta, gamma, have we heard of those before? In the Hebrew language, the first three letters are not alpha, beta, and gamma, but think about how similar they sound. Aleph, bet, and gimel. And so essentially what we're going to have is each line of the first chapter of the book of Nahum beginning with a different letter. It would be like us writing a book where the first sentence begins with the letter A, second sentence with the letter B, third sentence with the letter C, etc. So it's essentially a psalm we can see there with an acrostic, each verse containing a succeeding letter of the Hebrew alphabet, dated again to the 7th century BC, which again we refer to as the 600s. Nineveh was declining. The capital of the Assyrian Empire was in decline. The fall of Nineveh would occur in 612 BC, so we believe that it's before the fall of Nineveh. But because Assyria was so hated, and we talked about this before, Assyria really ruled by making the rest of us fear them, right? By coming in and terrorizing civilian populations. Are we going to rebel against the group that's going to take it out, not just on our army, but on our civilians? Not so much. And so they were feared and they were hated. And so when we have prophecies about Nineveh falling, that was good news for all of us. Nahum is not quoted in the New Testament. We don't find Nahum in the Christian scriptures. But this idea of God destroying evil, again, on that day when God comes, God is not going to be happy. We found echoes of that in Paul's letter to the Romans and also in the book of Revelations. When God comes in the book of Revelations, is God happy? God is coming, and there's hell to pay. Shall we read some of Nahum's words to be able to see what it is that he wrote, for instance? In chapter 1, verses 2 to 4, we begin the acrostic. Verse 1 just sets up the book of Nahum, a prophecy concerning Nineveh. The book of the vision of Nahum, the Elkoshite. Interesting. All that tells us that Nahum is from a city that we have no record in the rest of the Bible where this city is. We wouldn't know that this city existed, except that we know that Nahum was apparently from the city. The acrostic begins again with the Hebrew letter Aleph, and then Bet, and then Gimel in different sentences, in 3 succeeding sentences. The Lord is a jealous and avenging God. The Lord takes vengeance and is filled with wrath. What kind of God is this painting for us? This was very much an Old Testament image of God, this God who's going to come and turn people into pillars of salt, or smite them, or make the earth open up and swallow them. The Lord takes vengeance on his foes and vents his wrath against his enemies. The Lord is slow to anger but great in power. The Lord will leave the guilty unpunished. The Lord will not leave the guilty unpunished. His way is in the whirlwind and the storm, and the clouds are the dust of his feet. This image of this powerful God that controls all of nature. He rebukes the sea and dries it up. He makes all the rivers run dry. Bashan and Carmel wither, and the blossoms of Lebanon fade. This image of this God, when God comes, is not a pretty picture. The flowers fade when God comes and wither. Flash forward to chapter 3, verses 1 to 4. Chapter 2 is all about Nineveh falling. Chapter 3, a woe to Nineveh. Woe to the city of blood, full of lies, full of plunder, never without victims. The crack of whips, the clatter of wheels, galloping horses and jolting chariots, charging cavalry, flashing swords and glittering spears. Many casualties, piles of death, bodies without number, people stumbling over the corpses. What it is that Nineveh is going to be like when God comes. We're going to be tripping over the corpses. The corpses are going to be piled up that high. All because of the wanton lust of a prostitute, alluring the mistress of sorceries. You remember the prostitute imagery before? What prophet mentioned this prostitute imagery? That was the book of the prophet Hosea and his wife, Gomer. So Hosea and Gomer, how it was that he went off and married a prostitute as an image of showing, this is what you, Israel, have done. You are the espoused of the Lord, and you are worse than a prostitute. How it is that verse 4 ends, how it is that Nineveh enslaved nations by her prostitution and peoples by her witchcraft. And so as a result of that, what's going to happen in Nineveh? On that day, God is not going to be happy. There's a day of judgment coming for wicked Nineveh. Makes us all want to go home and read the prophet Nahum before going to bed tonight. And see what images are left in our mind after reading that book and trying to go down, fall to sleep after reading that book.